all weekend using the medium of sound via my voice. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different for our next guest. I thought I would introduce him through the medium of modern dance. The sort of stuff you might see on Channel 4 for about 2 seconds before you turn it off in disgust, or the sort of thing those pseudo-intellectual tossers on Late Review might enthuse over.
Good afternoon. It's always very difficult to follow up from Richard's introductions. For a moment there I wasn't sure whether it was dancing or sumo wrestling. Hi, I'm here this afternoon, as you've seen from the programme, to talk to you a little bit about raccoons. Not an animal that we possibly want to encourage in this country, but I wrote an article for Animals and Men a couple of months ago and took the view that maybe we've had a lot of raccoons loose here, but they're probably not living here. I'm in flux at the moment. They might be here, they might not. I don't know. Interestingly, where to start, I heard of another one. Anyway, let's put some slides up and I'll run through the information so far. Hopefully we'll get some more. I suspect I might get some more this afternoon. That's the animal. I'm sure all of you know it. Dreadful print, sorry about that. At least I've got a clear conscience as far as copyright's concerned, because that's well over 100 years old. And the animal, to use its Latin name, Procyon loter. Pro means before, kion from Greek means dog, and loter means to wash. As I'm sure you're aware, in captivity there's lots of film of them washing their food. As far as we know, they've been kept in captivity for certainly several hundred years. It's quite possible some of the American Indians may have hand-reared them, American native people may have hand-reared them rather than just keeping them for purposes, may have had them as pets at some time before America was discovered. I don't really know. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I'll run through briefly the history that I've discovered so far about them in the UK, and so we don't distract you, have you reading ahead, I'll deal with each one separately. Can I just see the first one? Right, okay. One of the subjects I've looked at a lot in the past is travelling menageries, these sort of mobile zoos that used to travel around the UK before there was anywhere that was open to the public on a fixed basis. And they used to go around the fairs. One of the gentlemen exhibitors that we've not really heard much about in the travelling menagerie world was a guy called Perkins, and he had a wagon accident in 1810 in what was Rutland. Rutland's extinct now, of course, as well. And lost both a wolf and a raccoon. Neither were recaptured. That was courtesy of the Times. I know nothing further about that one. Let's move on, if we can. Eccleston Gate near Chester. That one took some finding, actually, because there's quite a few Ecclestons around the country. But we confirmed that it was that one. That's 90 miles away from where Perkins lost his. Only 13 months later, but we do see that a fine raccoon was taken. Again, I think that one was from the Times. So they're fairly good about recording it at the time, if you pardon the pun. Can we move on again? 1844, this starts to get much more interesting and much more local. We've got one captured alive at Ilfracombe in North Devon, and 2 others caught lately in the area. And the explanation for that was that a ship had been wrecked, literally on the Ilfracombe coast. A timber carrying ship from Central America is the only one that sort of lines up at the time. And that there were obviously live raccoons on board, because the Times recorded this one from the North Devon Advertiser. I nipped up to Barnstaple and had a look at the North Devon Advertiser. It's the only place where they've got them on microfilm and easily available. And literally got exactly the same wording as the Times. So the Times had copied it verbatim, that was that. No more detail. I went through the newspapers for about 4 or 5 days, 4 or 5 weeks, it was a weekly, either side of it, and found no further mentions at all, which is a bit of a shame because there's quite a story there, obviously. And let's have a look at the next one if we can. 1848, one shot at Tamworth's in Staffs. That one again came out of the blue, the information on this one. It was in Scientific American, and I was sort of looking up the word menageries on on the Making of America website, and we found the word menagerie, because this one was thought to have escaped from a travelling menagerie, and it sort of kicked up. So that was 1848 in Tamworth. And on please. Yeah, the Dorset one. This is one of those delightful books. In fact, I think the print I started off with came from that book. One of those sort of, it wasn't by the Reverend Wood, but it's like the Reverend Wood, who produced massive, massive books. Heaven only knows what happened to his flock when he was writing, because he produced these massive books in Victorian days. But unfortunately, they didn't always put the date in them. Now when you publish a book, you're supposed to put the date in it. And all I know from the print style and from the vocabulary, it's late 19th century. But there's a reference to one being caught in Dorset, and it was kept alive and as a pet by somebody. So that's all we know about that one. 1950s to 1970s at least, there's a colony of raccoons living at Bayliston area of Glasgow, just north of the zoo. And that drops the hint, that says it all, north of the zoo. There were escapes. We don't know whether they're still there. The area they were living in became suddenly subject to much less examination because it was raccoon utopia. Anybody got any ideas what raccoon utopia is? The local tip. And they're sort of fencing the tip to stop people scavenging off it, and so the sightings haven't been reported. Whether they're still there or not, we just don't know. I then got involved with looking at the Math and DEFRA reports, and that was interesting because they've got records of 22 raccoons out of captivity, and I'm sorry, dreadful typing error there. 6 captured in 1984, which was the year when in England and Wales they were added to the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, which now extends to Scotland as well. For those of you from outside the area, from outside England, Wales and Scotland, you may or may not be aware in this country we have something called the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, which was introduced in 1976 because the safari parks were producing surplus lions, and literally at the end of the season you could buy them for the price of the pelt, which was £10 to £20, and it was only going to be a matter of time before someone was killed and eaten, or killed and partially eaten, or just killed for the hell of it. And what happened is the Act first came out in 1976, where things that you might want as a pet for the children, like a rhinoceros or a hippopotamus or an elephant, were put on the Act. But when they reviewed it in '84, the RSPCA in particular put a lot of pressure on the government to put in exotic animals that they just didn't think people should keep. Red-eared terrapins were almost added at that stage, the little ones that usually die of neglect in captivity. Because the RSPCA pointed out to the government quite earnestly that they carry salmonella. And yes, they do, but unfortunately if you put them on the Act for that reason, you're probably going to put chickens on the Act as well. And the whole idea was to stop people being eaten by big cats or stomped on by pet elephants on the rampage. And the concept of dangerous chickens didn't really gel, so terrapins didn't get added, but they were actually seriously considered. Unfortunately, the raccoons, coatis, kinkajous, olingos and so on did get added. The lemurs got added at that stage as well, and for those of you that know lemurs, the government then sort of had a quick rethink and hastily removed the gentle lemur, because with the name gentle lemur they could hardly say, well actually, it's misnamed and it's the dangerous lemur, so anyway, well, the Dangerous Wild Animal Act is a shambles, it's being reviewed, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But they found 6 out in 1984 when the raccoon was added, so presumably 6 people in different places dumped them quick rather than risk prosecution or being inspected by the local authority. I'm very embarrassed about this. When I had the cutting, I've lost it. But sometime in the 1980s and 1990s, but it was well after 1984, somebody came home in Launceston in Cornwall. Anybody here from Launceston? Anybody visited Launceston? Yeah. they sort of, you know, it makes front page of the newspaper if they have a sheep dipping order or something. It's pretty quiet and placid place. It makes Bournemouth and Brighton look like the epitome of Beelzebub. No, I won't go into that. Anyway, we've got one, literally somebody came home, no evidence of people keeping animals in the area or anything, and found one helping itself in the larder. Sensibly closed the door and windows, and that animal was then back in captivity. Unfortunately, as I say, I've lost the cutting of the date on, which is very embarrassing. 1988, they did a quick review of the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, and they were actually discovered to be 37 licensed animals held by 19 private owners in Great Britain. And the thing about the Dangerous Wild Animal Act is that the animals have to be listed individually. You don't just have a licence to keep dangerous wild animals, you know, because you apply for it because you've got a raccoon and then the lions arrive the week after. Can't get away with that. You've got to list the species, and the local authority have got to be informed 48 hours before you increase the numbers. About breeding time, it gets very sort of wary, you know, I think they're going to give birth on Friday. Okay, we'll write it down, you know, you have to apply to the council formally when they have. Let's move on. August 1977, a place called Stepaside in Pembroke, one was captured. That had been seen in the area for 18 months prior to capture, and clearly was sort of quite well known. The fact it's been seen for so long suggests it's an escaped domestic. You know, animals that are bred in the wild tend to go to greater lengths not to be seen. Once they're out of the cage, they're quite used to people nearby, so they'll often let you get close without actually touching. So the fact it's been seen for 18 months says maybe he's been out for some time. 1998, Randy was caught at Exwick in Exeter, taken to Newquay Zoo and escapes again. Interesting story about Randy. Much to the CFZ's embarrassment, sorry John, no, he's cleared off the bar I guess. I phoned him and said, hey, have you seen this morning's Western Morning News? No. Raccoon caught just up the road from the CFZ, and the first they know about it is when I phoned from Plymouth. Interesting story, chap in whichever road it was has koi carp. And he woke up one morning and found a totally dissembled koi carp, large one, quite expensive, at the side of the pool. Okay, so he spends the night out there with a torch expecting to see a neighbour's cat or a mink or something, and then sees a raccoon. Phones the RSPCA and says, oh, we've got raccoons, can you bring me a live trap please? To which he's assured, no sir, we don't have raccoons in this country. No, I've got a raccoon. No sir, what's the problem? Well, the fish are going. Fine, right. Well, we'll bring you a trap, but it won't be a raccoon. Puts a kipper in it. I didn't know, apparently kippers are hot stuff for trapping raccoons. And the following morning, phones the RSPCA and said, you know that raccoon I haven't got? Do you want to come and collect it? Anyway, he ends up at Newquay Zoo, and to their embarrassment, escapes again within 3 or 4 days. Let's move on to the next one. 3rd of October 2000, a raccoon seen in the Loughborough area of Leicester. This isn't a dim and distant big cat sighting on the horizon, sort of 800 yards away, is it, isn't it? This is 35 feet away job. No doubt about identification, definitely a raccoon. May 2002, a farm near Padstow, one captured and taken to Newquay Zoo. That one's called Chuck. August 2002, Meltham near Huddersfield in Yorkshire, the RSPCA report a number of raccoons living on a farm feeding on poultry. They don't state whether it's captured. Anybody here ever tried getting information out of the RSPCA? Yeah. Tricky, isn't it? You get, whatever you try and do, you get put through to the central office. And then what, are you legitimate press? No, right, well I'm not sure we can help you. There could be a court case outstanding. Well, it won't be going for jury trial, and if it is, I could, you know, put my hand up and say I already have knowledge of the case, so there's no reason why you can't tell me. Oh. But we'll have to get back to you. They never do. They never do, I'm still waiting. It's a bit of a nuisance because when you're trying to put data together like this, you kind of like to know. I had the same problem. They found 2 lynx in a place in Yorkshire that apparently were going to be released for hunting that the RSPCA was involved in the seizure of. And yeah, on television quite happily in part of the Life of Grime series. Try and get the information about where they are now. No, you might be going to steal them to release them for hunting. Yeah, okay, thanks. Let's move on. August the 30th, 2003, one was captured at Bingham in Nottinghamshire and taken to the local exotic animal refuge in Peterborough. When I found the owner, delightful lady, she said, yeah, we get them brought in occasionally, and she actually went out 12 years previously and caught one herself that the police weren't sort of, I think it had hissed at the police officer or something and frightened him. And she went out and brought that one in, and she was aware of another exotic animal refuge that had one brought in within the last 4 or 5 years. And she also had a couple of illegal pets, which sort of people had surrendered. You know, Granddaddy's Racoon, and when Granddaddy died or went into a home or whatever, they just went quietly to the refuge, so no one got prosecuted. September 2003, we've got one at Thorpe on the Hill in Lincolnshire, and that animal had been seen for 2 months previously in the area. And again, quite a few sightings, and something I'm starting to see with big cats. People in the area were not reporting it. They didn't want someone to capture it. They were just happy just to see it. You know, nice animal, a bit different. As long as he keeps his mitts off my guinea pigs, I'm happy. And yeah, so they were keeping quiet. He got caught in the end. And the 8th of November 2003, a raccoon caught near Paul in Penzance, and that would have been seen for 3 weeks previously in the area. I think that just about brings us up to date. As far as I know, none have been caught this year. But what's interesting is there was an investigation done in relation to a review of the Dangerous Wild Animal Act by the Zoovet Group, and for the Department of the Environment, or DEFRA, or whatever it is this week. And they've actually advised that raccoons, coatis and a number of other small animals, that for some strange reason, large porcupines, should come off the Dangerous Wild Animal Act list, so you can actually possess them without a licence. It's not gone through yet, it will go through. Now, I want to make just 2 points having gone through all this. If we could have the next slide, please. When you start dealing with these sightings, one of the best things to do, I find, is always to put a map together. And if you look at the 19th century map, I put crosses on, they're not very clear, I'll just point them out to you. 3 at Ilfracombe, 1 in Dorset, and then the 2 that were 13 months apart further on. There's no real pattern there, apart from the fact that the Ilfracombe 3 could have been more than 3, we just don't know. Can I move on to the next map, please? Because that's the 19th century. This is the latter part of the 20th century. This does start to get more interesting because you can see some really nice grouping here. Four in Devon and Cornwall, 3 of which are actually in Cornwall, nicely spread, and interesting south of Ilfracombe. It would be so lovely to say, maybe from 18 whatever, there's a colony survived in Cornwall from then on, and they've only really been noticed in the last few years, but it's too big a gap. These animals only typically live 7 or 8 years. They would have been seen since then, but again, we know from big cat reporting, excuse me, if it's quiet, the newspapers carry it. If it's not quiet, and there's all the more important things of the day, they don't. There could be sightings in it. I'm sure there are, if we can just get through the newspaper archives. And then if we look at central and northern England, we've almost got the grouping. And of course we've got the one in Scotland as well, which we know is a colony. But this potential for 2 groups starts to drop hints that maybe, we just maybe have an ongoing population. I've quoted in the next Animals Manual, a letter to follow up the article, the fact that one of the classic American textbooks lists a distance of something like several hundred miles that one tagged raccoon had moved in so many months. So although typically they stay in a local habitat, if they get spooked or really sort of get frightened, they can move longer distances. What worries me though is there's a possibility with that American one, it could have got locked in the back of a truck. It may have gone into a truck to forage or for shelter, and then got locked in and then let out when the truck was somewhere else. So it may not be that straightforward. But then of course if they did it in the States, they could do it here. They could do it here. That about, I mean, this is obviously an ongoing research project. As I say, Merrily was telling me earlier about a friend having seen one in the Cotswolds. I've got another clipping from about 1810 where a porter in the streets of London had his ear bitten by a raccoon and caused quite a scene. It was his raccoon, he was just walking around with it on the shoulder, so we know that they were kept as pets for some considerable time. They can, in fairness to them, they were under dangerous one. It was a misuse of the act, but they can give a nasty nip. I was trying to take a temperature of one about 5 years ago and I got a nip. But in fairness, a dog will give you a nasty nip, so maybe it shouldn't be on the act. John said I shouldn't tell you about books, so I won't, but if we just put the next slide up. Anyway, what I like about these sessions is questions and answers or comments from the floor, so let's... Anybody got any comments or questions? Sir?
Yeah, I believe there's a very limited population now in Germany, obviously also introduced.
Yeah, the German situation, absolutely.
The contrast.
The German situation is absolutely fantastic as an example of the damage an introduced species can do. I referred to it in the article, and the Germans are now getting worried because it's not just in Germany, it's spreading across into Poland, and according to some reports could be down through France and Spain. Two reasons. One, before the Second World War, one of the senior politicians who didn't survive the war, was one of Adolf's supporters, introduced some to spice up the hunting in one area.
I've heard it was Goering.
Sorry, it was Goring. It was Goring, definitely. And secondly, in the early years of the war, before our bombers were actually very good at hitting precise targets, we blew up a fur farm outside Berlin. And no one actually pieced together the pieces of raccoon, but the estimates vary between 100 and 200 that went on the run after that. And of course, for any fairly fast breeding animal, they're not like rodents, but they can increase the numbers fairly quickly. That does increase the population. They're getting dreadful problems with them going into houses. One of the suggestions, quite seriously, from a German pest officer was the only way to get them out, if they really want to be in there, is playing loud rock music in the roof for 24 hours a day. Which you may prefer the raccoons. Having lived in a house for a short period of time many years ago which had rats in the roof, and hearing them banging around at night, having an animal which weighs something like 20 to 40 times more than that, must make a hell of a racket. It really must. So yeah, the Germans are in a right mess because half the conservationists want to keep them, and German animal laws tend to vary from state to state anyway, and the pest people and the serious biologists who are anti-introduced species want rid. You might find it interesting as well, they've also, sorry, mine's jumping from one thing to another, they've also got chipmunks in a few places in Germany as well, which were escaped pets from some of the American bases. It's possible there may have been the odd raccoon escaped from the American bases as well, but the population is Goring and fur farms primarily. There are people that have come up with estimated numbers, but the problem is because the ranges are limited and no one really knows what the true ranges are, trying to come up with an estimated population is very difficult. It would be a mega nightmare trying to eradicate them. Yeah. Sir?
Yeah, you know that individual called Randy, once it escaped from Newquay Zoo, were there any subsequent sightings of it?
Yeah, Newquay Zoo has lost a couple of its recaptures, and again, there's a lovely story, and I'm not sure I should tell you this, or Mike's now no longer the director, he won't get into trouble for it. They had one on the run for about 2 or 3 weeks, and they got an interesting phone call from a chap who said, look, can you tread gently here, because it's in my mum's garden and she loves him and doesn't want him to disappear, and she's making roast potatoes for him and putting roast potatoes on the bird table, and he loves roast potatoes. Okay, fine. Well, we've got to get into trouble because technically this is dangerous, but he's not dangerous now. He's not dangerous, he's safe, he's a lovely animal. So the zoo went down there and introduced themselves very nicely to the lady and said, look, we're sorry, but someone's going to shoot him if he stays out any longer, and the local authority have got power to do that anyway. So they put a live trap and took him back, and quite clearly left the lady upset, and said, oh, you can come and have a look if you want, it'll be alright, he's with the others and they've got a lovely enclosure, come and have a look, and we'll give you tea or something if you come and have a look. And 3 days later, they got a phone call from us saying, "Oh, it's ever so nice of you to have changed your mind. I've got the potatoes on his back." And he apparently got out. He went, and they've spent ages watching him in there. They can't work out where he's getting out. But at least he's got the decency not to show the others. Probably keeping the roast potatoes for himself. And occasionally he gets out and he pops down the road to where it's not that close. I think it's about half a mile or 3/4 of a mile away. But he pops down there for his roast potatoes, and then. Well, they realise now, once they notice he's gone, they're down there with the live trap and they get him back. The problem is working out where he escapes. If you're in Newquay and you see him going past, do tell them, they'll come and pick him up. Any more?
Do you have any skunks? Are they part of the same family?
They're quite closely related, yeah.
Do the UK have any skunks?
Not officially. When I was looking at this research, I did find in Devon a fur farm in the 1920s, I think it was. Again, it's in the article, that were breeding skunks. And they brought a large number in, and you just wonder about the caging, because they pointed out that for the first 3 days they didn't eat anything that was given to them. They killed and ate all the rabbits in the enclosure. So, yes, I haven't had any reports of skunks being captured here. But I've got that one report of them being fur farmed here. As far as I know, raccoons have never been fur farmed here. But again, they're one of those animals that could survive in a small pocket somewhere without being spotted. Zoo-wise, they're not too good in exhibit because they tend to be nocturnal. If you go up to Exmoor Zoological Park near Bratton Fleming near Barnstaple, if it's quiet day, if you ask the owners, they'll bring their skunk down and show you. They've got a little skunk in the flat upstairs.
Oh, right.
It's been descented, and it's a lovely little animal. And it is a little one. A lot of the fur farm ones in captivity seem to have sort of decreased in size. Morally.
Yeah, how difficult is it to see a raccoon in America? I mean, are they very elusive? Do you commonly see one, or are they quite...
It all depends on how long you spend hanging around the dustbins.
It'd be like us seeing a fox, say.
Yeah, well, depending on the area you live in. If you're in the right place, you can see them regularly. I mean, I live in a rough area of Plymouth, and I can go out and see urban foxes one night in two, providing the weather's fit with them. And I guess you've got the same in many places in the States. It will partly be a function of the rabies control in the States, though, because they are a rabies vector there. And they will heavily trap when there's rabies in the area to try and sort of stop it spreading. Yeah. Sister did a summer camp, and they had to have discipline against the children who didn't close the dustbins properly because of them. They were in every night. They just took the stuff everywhere, make a real mess of it.
If you say that it looks like you're not a dangerous animal out,
Yeah.
so that's going to lead to more people getting a positive pet.
Mm.
If we get escapes, which probably will happen,
Mm.
we start breeding, which of our native animals will be threatened? If you start to breed on the ground, like we've got in Germany, there's obviously going to be a displacement effect. They're going to start moving to territory of native animals.
Gauss's exclusion theory is the sort of highbrow biological term. If you introduce a species, it tends to displace anything that lives in exactly the same niche, being sort of very technical about it. We haven't really got an eat-all animal that lives up trees and is quite happy in urban environments here. As far as I know, in Germany, it hasn't actually actively displaced the foxes. The domestic cat, they are accused of killing domestic cats. One of the English populations massacred quite a few rabbits and guinea pigs in cages, and they were getting them out of cages. I'm also aware of a nice lady I used to work with years ago, who in the States saw on a garage forecourt a vending machine go up in flames, where a raccoon had got inside it but short-circuited the electrics and literally blew the thing up. And it wasn't the first time it had happened there. The garage people evacuated it quickly, obviously because of the fire and the petrol. And the owner was cursing about damn raccoons getting in there again. And they were actually putting a hangover wire mesh on it as well. as with any introduction, you don't know. It could be the prey that's the problem. I'd be a bit worried if they got into a woodland where there was a recovering dormouse population, because I suspect dormice will be easy pickings. With the dexterous manner of them, the way they pull the nests apart, they'd probably find that great fun as well.
Bad news for amphibians.
Yes, very bad news for amphibians, and some of the Caribbean islands where they were introduced have suffered loss of, island species of amphibians, which are always a bit iffy anyway. Islands for amphibians are always very risky, because you get a hurricane or something, you get salt water coming in on the marshes, and of course the salt water kills the amphibians very quickly. And ground-dwelling birds would suffer because of the eggs. As you may be aware, they tend to take crocodile and turtle eggs, a lot more turtle eggs than crocodile eggs, on Caribbean island beaches, and they've played havoc where they've been introduced on some of those islands. If we get rabies from the continent, yeah, but they're not going to be as big a potential vector as our fox and badger population. Fox population probably more than badgers.
Chris, you've got to forgive me. Forgive me for that as well. Chris, you've got to forgive me because I've been outside doing most of your talk, having a cigarette and waiting for our two special guests who just arrived at the back. But, so if you've already answered this question, please forgive me. But how fast do they breed? How long would it take for a fertile pair of raccoons to populate a neighbourhood?
How big's the population? It's going to be a function of the food, probably. They can produce 1 litre, typically 3 or 4 a year, but as with most carnivores, they're fairly good parents, so unlike the herbivores, you don't lose large numbers. Rabbit populations, they breed like the clappers, but loads of them get killed in the first few months of life once they start leaving the nest. It's not explosive like rodents, but it will be, you've got an animal that lives about 7 years, and they probably double the population every 3 years.
Yeah, that's basically, that's what I meant. I didn't put the question very well. Another one, how big are normal raccoons? I've got this method to my madness here. For a change.
Plus tail. You got some big ones. There was one in the press this year or last year that I think got to 36 pounds or something. I gather it's now died of congestive heart failure. But the typical ones are about this big. Who's got them? Kilmartin in North Devon have got them. They've been loose. They got out early this year for a few weeks. And Portfell Animal Land have got them. Newquay Zoo have got them. Newquay's got a brilliant enclosure, really good one, except they keep on getting out. Or one that keeps on getting out. And most of the zoos that haven't gone heavily into conservation have them. I don't know what the view is in the room. I get upset with zoos that go too much into conservation, because most endangered species are partly endangered because they're coming to the end of their evolutionary life anyway. I don't know whether everyone can cope with this, but most species have a natural life and then evolve into something else or die out as something else evolves to take over. Throwing money at the giant panda was dying out before man came along anyway. Hunting the last few only speeds it up. We're better spending money on trying to conserve animals that we've reduced in numbers seriously. And just taking it into the zoo world, my idea in the zoo world is that we should look at animals that are successors. Animals are successors because they remain adaptable instead of becoming too adapted. So to that extent, they make a good zoo exhibit. They also make a good zoo exhibit because they're doing things. Children know their names. You can teach them spelling with them because there's a big thing, you have 1 or 2 C's in them. They've got beautiful behaviour. They learn to exploit new environments. So they're a good teaching model. And at the end of the day, they're also a good hat, but we won't go into that.
When I was in Illinois a few months back, I saw, the only times I ever saw them, they were all in urban environments. I actually saw more urban raccoons like you see urban foxes in Exeter, a hell of a lot more.
Yeah.
But I was asking about the size because there's an old guy that I met down on the Kentucky border. He said, hot damn boy. I saw the goddamn raccoon, I saw the goddamn coon last week, and I was thinking, oh dear God, here we go, race relations now. I saw that goddamn coon last week, it was so big it's stuck in the goddamn trash can.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe him. That night I went out and I saw this goddamn bloody enormous thing. It was nearly the size of our dog. And I just didn't know they got that big.
Yeah, it's the urban environment thing. We've got the same with urban foxes in the UK. Some of them are becoming bigger than the wild counterparts. Life out in the woodland is not that easy. It's hard work. You know, things chase you and you've got to run up trees and whatever, otherwise you get killed and eaten. You tend not to be chased across the open by people wearing red coats with packs of dogs in the rougher areas of Stoke and Plymouth. Certainly haven't seen many lumps in the Exwick area or anything. So yeah,
Because that's what I was wondering, because there's all this stuff in the press about how the world's getting fatter. I mean, I certainly am. But how the world's getting fatter because people are having much high-fat diets and convenience food and junk food now.
yeah, and you get lots of dogs dying of fatal congestion in the heart these days as well.
And from what I can gather, especially in that part of America where I was from, the raccoons are most found outside the bins at the back of fast food jobs. And I was wondering if they were getting bigger because they were eating a totally unnatural diet.
I'm sure they are. They're taking on more fat than they would in the wild.
Because some of the ones I saw looked like sort of black and white beach balls.
Effectively, it's unhealthy fat as well because it's mainly sort of farm animal type fat rather than the sort of long chain fatty acids that they get from fish and from crustaceans and so on.
Jill?
Are red pandas?
Yeah, they're all part of the same family. Yeah.
Any other questions, folks? Yes,
I
Darren.
don't know if it's a question, but it's a point. I'm a little bit concerned with what you were just saying about letting species become extinct because they seem to be at the end of their evolutionary life.
Limited
Just
resources.
because you don't know, you can't really predict the future. You don't know that that's the case.
Yeah, but every time you do,
It's more likely to be safer. Isn't it?
every time you do a major property development, you're effectively making that decision. You know, we've had developments in the States where they know they're going to make river fish extinct. And the question is, do they or don't they? Whatever happens, you're only going to have limited resources to throw at conservation. You've got to prioritise. I know ideally we conserve habitats, but the problem is how big a habitat? How big a habitat do we need to support a species?
But you appreciate it's dangerous to sometimes promote the idea that we should let species go extinct because then you're just giving politicians an excuse to not conserve animals which by human activity have been reduced in. Like you mentioned the giant panda.
Politicians will do what politicians will do, irrespective of the arguments that are presented to them, even when they're good arguments. It's a sad state of affairs. You know, I'm sorry, if we look at the European Union, we're a member of it whether we like it or not. And like any massive organisation, it will become a bigger organisation, but there are only so many people doing practical jobs that can support so many administrators. And you'll get an evolutionary factor developing on that ultimately. I'm sure there's a Darwinian side of politics, but the terms... It's not today's topic, I don't think, but I hope, you know, we see that we have to prioritise on with the assets that are available. And yes, saying the giant panda should be allowed to become extinct could be professional suicide. You know, nice cuddly animal like that. Ooh.
John?
Just talking about the same point actually, I mean, you mentioned that you don't like zoos doing this kind of research, but these are the kind of animals actually which get punted in because they're spectacular animals.
Yeah,
so that's usually niche.
Yeah, I didn't say I don't like them doing it. I'm saying there's more to zoos than just conserving endangered species. Small zoos and people starting up shouldn't be working with the last 20 of this or last 15 of that. They need to work with the common species to get experience in large animal handling and
So
so
on
on.
resignation, you're saying, well, you can't conserve the habitat and you don't like them putting these animals in zoos, but that's a habitat.
Yeah.
Stick them there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we've got evidence of that with things like great apes. Fourth, fifth generation zoo bred. You try to put them back in the wild, and they've been selected for surviving in a zoo environment. You know, they're not going to be given immunisations in the wild. They may have died of a childhood infection before they grew up to be big animals. You're changing, when you do reintroductions, the basic genetics of the wild population.
Yeah.
We don't know,
Not really, aren't we?
but as far as I'm aware, they haven't actually done any damage with that yet.
And let's face it, we're keeping them for us, not for the balance of nature. We're keeping them because we want them, we care. So accepting that right from the start has been the premise.
I think that's a matter for individual ethics and views. The old zookeepers used to be very much like collectors. Yes, we've got to such and such. And
that's the reason we're keeping most animals, isn't it? I mean, we see the large spectacular species, and we feel a need to keep these animals alive because they are amazing, spectacular. And
At the end of the day, if you can say you're actually involved in something not becoming extinct, that's a pretty altruistic statement, maybe. Altruistic.
Well, you make the cash off them too because the panda brings them back.
Flagship
Yes.
panda, yeah.
Yeah, it's a flagship species. Mm.
Yeah.
So-
saying the diet is purely an environmental consequence of the habitat shrinking, or because there was a theory fairly recently about species having a specific life expectancy depending on the telomerase in the bee. Is party to that? I would say.
I think you've got to look at each species individually. You know, things do die out for strange reasons. If we look at some of the captive species, we get nice models to work with. We know some of the fighting dogs they bred in the States were actually going to die out because they were that aggressive they couldn't even be brought together to mate. That's evolution in action. It's not natural selection, it's very unnatural selection, but it's taking something to an extreme. Yeah, I mean, you've really got to look at each species on its own. There are things that are dying out for no explicable reason. The giant panda, by developing in the way it did, it is a carnivore that is developed to eat an exclusively vegetarian diet, and not only that, the least nutritious vegetation there is. It has to eat for something like 12 hours a day just to carry on, or 8 hours a day I think it is, just to carry on breathing, walking. And I think if it wants very active, violent sex, sorry, excuse me for saying that, it has to actually eat for a further 2 hours before it can do that.
It sounds like you're describing Richard. Eats all day and then you need the big meals and violent sex.
They do take me, but you get it up to the deer.
It's just that they're not very fast and able to do it. I'm sure they eat quite a bit of invertebrates as well by virtue of the bulk of greenery that they're eating.
Gary?
Sorry, surely the fact that the giant panda is so specialised and such an evolutionary sort of freak of somewhat, that it's because it's a carnivore and it's a member of the bear family, maybe closer related to raccoons. Surely we should make the effort to conserve it, so as then it can be studied better, and it's better to have something that's alive, a live animal rather than an exhibit in a museum.
I agree. It's just the amount of money that is being spent on it compared to other species that are being allowed to die out because the money isn't available is such. I don't say you must let it die out. I say you just think about it a little bit. Anything which becomes highly specialised puts itself at risk. You can see that not just in mainstream biology. You can see it in things like the employment market. You become highly qualified in one area. If that firm goes under, suddenly you have to start again from the beginning somewhere else.
Can raccoons be domesticated and do they sort of training with voice commands, that sort of thing?
I've known one that will come to call. I know several that have been kept as pets prior to the Act. There was a point actually I was going to bring up there. There is an organisation in the UK that I used to be a member of, and they dropped me, which means it's probably quite a good organisation, called the National Association of Private Animal Keepers, who tried to band together with a view to trying to limit legislation on people keeping animals. And when they were interviewed by the Zoo Vet group, the people that did the report for the review of the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, they said, several of their members do have raccoons but won't licence them because they don't consider they are dangerous. Which is a highly irresponsible and stupid attitude. I don't consider in the right hand shotguns are dangerous, but that doesn't mean I keep one without a licence. Whether you like it or not, you're supposed to comply with the laws of the land, and if you don't, then go and live somewhere else where your liberal views are allowed. No, half the states in America you can still keep raccoons, and in the ones you can't, it's because either of rabies regulations or because of concerns about local native wildlife, and they don't want people taking them from the wild.
Right. So in the States they consider them safe enough in certain areas to keep pets?
Yeah.
I've seen them sold in pet shops.
Yeah. I've seen them sold in pet shops in the UK prior to '84, and it's like a lot of the carnivores. If you get a nice one as a youngster, fine. If you try and do something with a wild caught one or with an adult one that's lived without human contact, you're going to get badly bitten, and it'll probably never calm down.
They are trained up, so that's simple as all sorts
Mm. Mm.
Do they run away? Are they sort of like dogs? Will they come back to you?
Yeah, that's like the woman spoke to them about things to put in the bins and all sorts of stuff. They ran around and stuff.
Can you let them out the back garden? On their own, you know, or they just sort of
I
run away?
think because it's actually a wild animal rather than a nested one, if you let them out the back, they run off. They might come back again because they recognise this is where they get a source of food, but they would, I think they would run off into the woods.
I think.
They did roll like cats.
Yeah, I think the
that's irritating.
The danger is that, although they're only distantly related to the bears compared to many other animals, they're neophilic like the bears. They like the new. They'll always be off exploring, and I think they're going to wander off exploring rather than let's get the hell out of this house. They're feeding with their own food. It's just going to be a wander, and then maybe they don't always find their way home.
Do you have
No. I was offered one prior to the Acts changing, but living where I did at the time, it wasn't really appropriate, i.e. an upstairs flat. Which is, of course, is the old joke, isn't it? A chap brings a raccoon home, and his wife says, well, where are we going to keep it? And he said, well, it'll be in the flat during the day, but it'll sleep in the bedroom with us at night. But what about the smell? Well, if I can put up with it, he can put up with it. I better leave it there, I'm running over time.
I can't think of a better way to end. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Mosier. Thank you guys, we got a half-hour break. Something I've always rather admired, I've got a video of one of the last shows Elvis Presley ever did, and I thought it was incredibly cheesy. He got up on stage and he introduced his father in the audience. I can introduce Graham's mum, Graham's aunt, who are there. Lovely to see you.